Welcome back. We're going to take a look now at the economy and specifically what a post-neoliberal, post-capitalist economy might be looking like. We've got three guests today who are all expert on the issue, really. We've got Michael Roberts, Marxist economist. He'll be speaking on Zoom. Yassamine Mather, who's a critique editorial board. She'll also be on Zoom. And we've got with us Chris Williamson, former Labour MP. We do know, of course, there's nothing natural about capitalism. It's not natural that 90% of the population of the world are suffering and are living in poverty. We know there's nothing natural about the climate catastrophe. That is not, and it's not a natural thing, capitalism. It's also not a permanent thing. We know for vast majority of time, people have lived in different societies and not non-capitalist societies. So we want to discuss how we look forward to a different version of how we can live. Capitalism is temporary. For a start, nothing lasts forever. And many economists believe that we are in a period now that could be described as capitalism in decline, late stage capitalism. The question is, what will it be replaced with and how do we get there? So first we want to talk to Michael Roberts, Marxist economist, about this question. We do want, Michael, an entirely different way of living, of organizing our economy, not based on profit, but based on need. That seems almost entirely impossible to imagine now. How do you envisage a sort of, a society where we organize according to need and not to profit? Welcome.
Well, Tina, your title was what's a post-neoliberal economy in a way, or post-capitalist one? Reminds me of the phrase neoliberal. People use this word quite a lot. What do we mean by that? We mean that since probably the 1980s, there's been a change in the way in which the governments of the major economies have tried to organize economies and society. They've moved from a position where there was government intervention, management of the economy, a welfare state. They've moved to getting rid of a lot of sections of the welfare state, deregulating the economy, deregulating the banking finance, also introducing laws to stop trade unions having effective power in presenting and preserving the positions of their representatives, their members, and also, above all, privatization, a massive privatization of what was in the public sector back in the 50s and 60s. We know that in Britain, in the case of transport and travel, in communications, and of course in utilities and in various other sectors of the economy which used to be publicly owned and run through the state are now completely privatized and in the hands of all kinds of private sector companies, including private equity companies, that's financial companies, and foreign companies, and so on. And we've also seen under neoliberalism a severe austerity of control of public spending, fiscal austerity and cuts in welfare. And that is designed to presumably improve the profitability and effectiveness of a capitalist economy. It's failed miserably. So what's the alternative? Do we go back to the period before the neoliberal economy began to develop in the 1980s, back to the 50s and 60s, and in some way restore what supposedly was a golden age of the post-war economy, where we had a welfare state, where we had generally full employment, where we had the opportunity for people to expand their knowledge in universities and so on, where there was a reasonable mixed economy, used to call it, partly publicly owned, partly privately owned. Now, in my view, which is a view that going back to the 50s and 60s is ruled out. It's not possible for that to happen any longer. Not only capitalists don't want it, it's not practical to even move in that direction. The only way we can go forward from a post-liberal, neoliberal economy is towards a fully, what I would call a socialist economy, which means that the bulk of the means of production and finance and industry in an economy is publicly owned, democratically run, and brought into a broad national plan for developing investment, productivity, employment, and people's living standards in general. And also to deal with an issue which didn't exist when the neoliberals moved into action, namely the environment, climate change, and global warming, of which nothing is really being done effectively by the current system of private economy around the world globally. Unless we can change that position in direction of a socialist economy, then we're going to be deteriorating even further than we are now. So it seems to me that we should be looking at, that's the basic aspiration that we have to have in our minds. I'm reminded, Tina, of what we used to have in the Labour Party organisation, a clause 4, which outlined specifically the need for a socialist economy as opposed to the current capitalist one. Of course, under Blair and Brown, that was got rid of, and now we don't have any in the Labour Party. They don't have any policy which represents a direction of socialism. For them, it's just trying to sustain the existing system. Rachel Reeves has told us, apparently in the conference today, that we're just going to go on. We're just going to go on trying to keep the bondholders happy, trying to tax more in order to keep the fiscal budget of the government in balance. Not any prospect of developing the economy in the direction of a socialist direction. So that seems to me the alternative before us: a publicly owned, primarily publicly owned economy, democratically run, giving a basis for the state to provide a plan for the development of employment, incomes, and growth in the economy, and to do away with basically the private profit motive as the dominant feature of any economy in the future. That's our task.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, when you say it can't be done, even if you wanted to go back to the 50s and Keynesianism, it can't be done. Why do you think it can't be done?
Well, because the state of the capitalist economy now is so poor. If we want to measure it in different ways, measure it first of all in growth of the economy. That's the real output being produced in the major economies. They're hardly growing at all, 1 to 2% a year. Back in the 50s and 60s, economies were growing at 3, 4, or 5%. The rest of the global world was in trouble, but now not only is the world in trouble, but also the major economies in the global north. They're growing very poorly. Productivity has dropped almost to zero in most of those economies. Investment in the productive sectors of the economy has declined drastically. And the main reason for that is that there's no profit incentive for big capitalist companies to invest heavily in productive investment that could boost jobs, raise productivity and living standards. Profitability is well down for the majority of companies, not the big mega tech companies, but for the majority. As a result, investment or profits go not into investment in productive sectors, but into financial sectors, into real estate, into what Marx called fictitious capital, not real investment. And so everything is down to speculation in the stock market and the bond market. Take the stakes. The stock market in the United States is at record highs, but the economy is slowing down towards 1 or 2%, and living standards are going nowhere in the United States. That's why we can't go back to a system where it's trying to manage capitalism to make it work better, because the profitability for capitalism just isn't there.
Thank you, Michael. I want to bring in Chris Williamson now, former Labour MP. Thanks for joining us. I mean, you are a bit of a fan of modern monetary theory, and you also propose that municipal socialism could be one way of perhaps not going back to the 50s, but going back to that, state intervention and using the state to control capitalism a bit better. Do you think that as an alternative to, a publicly controlled, collectively owned society, is that a way towards it? Is an alternative? Is a way to save capitalism? How do you square that?
Well, I'm not interested in saving capitalism, but I do disagree with Michael's analysis, or part of Michael's analysis there. I do think it is indeed possible to go back to those halcyon days of the late 40s, 50s and 60s, and indeed the early 1970s. Things went wrong, really, when Dennis Healy went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise in 1976 and borrowed, I think it was $3.9 billion. We never needed to do that, and indeed that money was never drawn down, and Healy subsequently admitted that he made a mistake. It was wrong to do that. He said he was badly advised. He acknowledged he made a mistake, but for the wrong reasons. Look, it's easier in many ways to go back to that period than it was back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because we were part of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was an agreement that was thrashed out towards the end of the Second World War, where the pound was linked to the dollar and the dollar was kind of linked to gold. But Richard Nixon in 1971 jettisoned the Bretton Woods Agreement, and so the pound sterling has been a floating fiat currency ever since. And so therefore, literally money is no object for the government. Taxes do not fund public expenditure. Taxes are there to generate a value for the currency, obviously, but also and predominantly to control inflation and also to drive behaviour change in consumer spending and, for example, to deter people from smoking and encourage people to maybe drive environmentally friendly vehicles, etc. So money is no object for the government. They have as much money as they need. And when Rachel Reeves talks about financial black hole, that's just a figment of her imagination. It's nonsense. There is no black hole for a government that issues its own currency. It can never run out of money. And the only restriction on government spending is the availability of real resources in the economy. What do I mean by that? I mean the availability of workers, the availability of raw materials and plant and machinery and so on. And so long as you're not exceeding the availability of those resources, then you won't create any inflationary pressure. So what should we be therefore doing then? Well, we need a big fiscal stimulus to massively increase our public services, because there is a huge need, isn't there? There is a social care crisis in the country. So we should be employing lots more people to provide social care in the public sector. We need to be kicking the privateers out of all of the public services, the NHS in particular, but all public services have been, over the last 40 or 50 years, have been used as a cash cow, really, for the private sector. So that needs to be addressed, it seems to me. So we have a big increase in our public services, social care, reduce the pupil-teacher ratio. We need to be building new schools. We need to build a lot more homes for people. There is a massive housing crisis in the country right now, and that can be addressed, of course, through building new homes and acquiring homes that are available on the market at the moment. Municipalisation program, something that used to happen in the 1970s, where local authorities would buy up properties, not necessarily build them, because you haven't necessarily got the skills at the moment. You'd have to train people up to be able to build the houses, because we haven't necessarily got the skilled bricklayers and plasterers and roofers and carpenters, etc. So all that needs to be done. But we need to get off this myth that somehow taxes fund public expenditure, because that bestows a status on the billionaire class, that somehow we need rich people in order to fund a good society. And as Tony Benn used to say, if we can find the money to kill people, we can find the money to help people. And I heard Rachel Reeves talking nonsense on the Today programme this morning about, we've got to sell Britain's debt in order to, fund the government spending programme. And she's talking about the bond market, and Michael mentioned the bond market. What is the bond market? It's corporate welfare. The government isn't obliged to sell bonds. Who buys the bonds? The super rich, the corporations. I don't know, obviously some pension funds do and so on as well. But we don't need to sell those bonds. It's a myth to suggest that we somehow are at the mercy of the bond vigilantes, because why are we selling them? They don't need to do that.
Okay.
And the reason they sell bonds, they claim, is to meet the deficit, to meet the shortfall between how much is raised in tax, or how much is collected, should I say, in tax, and actual government expenditure. But it's all nonsense. So we need to end that, and we need to be saying we can have a good society. A good society is there for the taking. We need to, if you like, bring back the notion of Corbynomics, which was never actually implemented or never actually applied by John McDonnell. That's what he was talking about when he was being advised by Richard Murphy in the first leadership campaign.
Printing money, basically.
It's not about just printing money. I mean, actually, they don't print money. It's a few keystrokes in the treasury.
Making more money.
But when you talk about printing money, then people, they talk about the Weimar Republic and Zimbabwe and so on. And you need to. It's not just about spending money without limit. The limit is the availability of real resources to make sure that you're not creating an inflationary pressure. And so long as you do that, then we can have the good society. We can have look, we've got the 6th biggest economy in the world. We should have the best public services in the world. Our infrastructure is falling to pieces. We need to be investing in our infrastructure, investing in our public services, investing in housing. We can do it. It's not a pipe dream. It's doable. We just need the political will to make it happen.
On that, and I think that's exactly the point. It's the political will, and it is the political will after the Second World War, you know, when Keynesian solutions were applied everywhere, especially Germany, where I'm from. Wasn't it done mainly to keep the red thread in check? You know, the USSR was there as a real danger, and that's why they poured money in.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely sorry. Yes, I thought
let me bring in Yassamine now. Yassamine Mather, editor of Critique. So you are quite skeptical as well as that Keynesian solutions could be applied today. What do you think about what Chris just said?
Yeah, I think I agree with Michael Roberts in this. The problem is that I think capitalism has entered a very vital stage of its existence. It won't disappear automatically. There will be need for struggle. But what we are witnessing now is an irrational system. Even for its own survival, it's not in a position to repair itself, reform itself. Partly it is the nature of the new integrated capitalist system, where every economy is both dependent on other economies, but also forms part of a whole system. So you can see that any attempt at reform, any attempt at spending more, will be faced by hostile national states and capital flights that will completely erode these local socialist projects. I'm also concerned that in a way, giving hope for that, this type of, we can spend more so we can reform the system, improve the plight of the working class, it creates a depoliticization of class struggle, and that in itself has repercussions in that you are reducing the collective power instead of looking for real solutions. You're accepting what's possible what's possible now, and very often that becomes impossible the next day you've done it because of flight of capital, because of sanctions. Look at how states that have dissed the hegemon capitalist power are facing. They have dissed it politically, but if they had dissed it economically, they would face exactly the same things. They would face serious sanctions. They will face isolation. They will be forced into worst forms of austerity precisely because they are not part of this big whole. So I would say you need to have some kind of strategy that looks for the overthrow of the entire system in order to overcome irrationality, to overcome the alienation that modern capitalism has created, in order to unleash the forces that can, if you like, look for a completely new form of society. Trying to bandage this to, if you like, repair the current situation will not work. And we have seen examples of this in various local projects that have failed. And here I'm not just talking of abolishing markets or nationalizing and so on. It does require a conscious control by the workers of the means of production. So in addition to the economic aspects of this dramatic change, you would also need political change, a post-capitalist society that is free of bureaucratic command, that allows workers' control, allows political representation, is accountable to the class as opposed to a leadership of a party or an organization.
Thank you, Yasmin. On that subject, then, some people, that includes, I think, Chris's party leader, George Galloway, and I'll bring you back on this as well, do believe the BRICS countries, talking about the international system, the BRICS countries are a sort of alternative to capitalism. And, you outlined the need for international action. Are they an alternative then to this kind of capitalist exploitation profit system that we're seeing?
Well, the BRICS countries now include so many variations of capitalist dictatorships, authoritarian or non-authoritarian, but mainly authoritarian capitalist countries, that it's very difficult to talk of them as one unified force because there's differences between them. The main countries that economically is the glue, if you like, is China. And so we have to look, is China an example for the world? And I would say it isn't, because private ownership has not been abolished. The means of production are not under the control of the working class. Private capital dominates major sectors. My understanding is 80%. Class hasn't been abolished. We have billionaires, capitalist entrepreneurs. Capital accumulation for profit hasn't disappeared. So production is not for need, but for profit. And all of that makes it for critique, it's very difficult to use the terms that a country has become capitalist. So I am hesitant on that, but it has all the signs of capitalist class divisions, capitalist exploitation. All you could say is that in this period of transition, where we are in a period of transition since 1917, in some ways, we are in a period of transition. It isn't, new forms appear that are deformed and are not fully capitalist or not fully socialist, and very often they revert to capitalism because of the failure of the particular country, but also the absence of international progress. So in terms of BRICS themselves, I mean, Iran's Islamic Republic, for example, is one of the BRICS countries now. And you could say neoliberal economic policies remain, even at a time when they're challenged elsewhere, remain the dominant form of political economy in the country. So, and BRICS also now includes Saudi Arabia. So you can't really see BRICS as an alternative. As a political challenge, I wouldn't say alternative, as a political challenge to the existing world order, yes, you could say at times the dominant countries of the BRICS unity do stand, but economically, and our talks are about economy, I really can't see that.
Thanks, Yasmin. I mean, George Galloway has expressed his quite admiration for BRICS countries. Do you share that, and where do you see?
I do, and I think that's where we should be looking to.
What about Yasmin's point, though, that they are actually proto-capitalist countries and are not an alternative to the exploitation system?
Some of them are, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I mean, I think what we've just heard is basically a counsel of despair, that there is no real way of actually making progress. I mean, and what I'm suggesting is a practical way forward where we can use the power that we have at our disposal, because I keep coming back to the point, we issue our own currency, money is no object for the government, and we can build these international relations. But I think they need to sort of make the mind of talking about building a socialized, fully socialized economy. Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. If we think a fully socialized economy is the perfect model. But I think both the other speakers have talked about concern about capital flight. Well, they need to make their mind up. I mean, are they reliant on the private sector? If they're worried about capital flight, but that implies as well that somehow we're powerless in the face of these.
Well, how are you going to finance it if there's no
Because we issue the currency, and we can also lock their finances behind capital controls. Look, if Iceland can do it, then for goodness sake, Britain can certainly do it. I mean, when they tried to smash the Icelandic economy, they were unable to do so because they locked all of these spivs, speculators' money behind capital controls. So I just think we need a practical way forward, and what I'm arguing for is that practical solution. To build those alternative international relations, with the BRICS may not be perfect, but certainly damn sight better than the other option on the table. And before we get too critical of China's model, let's remember they've lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty. So I think they deserve some plaudits for that.
They also have no trade unions. They have no organized working class.
Well, I'm not going to debate about the
it's kind of important, though, isn't it? If we look at them as a good example.
No, we're talking about an example. What I'm saying is that they've lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, and they basically ensured that the private capital that is swirling around in the economy there is used for the benefit of the nation, as it were. But I'm talking about the British model and what we can do in this country, and I think we can certainly go back and indeed go better than what we had in the 1950s and 60s. I grew up in that period of time when you could go to university for free as a working class person, where you could get access to a council house very, very easily, where we had really good quality public services. They could have been better, and indeed they needed to be better.
Let me bring Michael Roberts back in then. Michael, what do you think about this? Could we do it in Britain without armies invading? Or could we have socialism in one country?
Well, I'd like to say that I agree entirely with what Chris said about we need better public services. We need to restore employment and improve housing across the country and the state of what is a broken Britain. The problem I have with doing that is it is just creating more funds for the government through the control of the unit of account sufficient, because as Chris says, the limit on this is the available resources, and the available resources and the means of production are not in the hands of the government. The majority of the means of production in the UK is in the hands of big business, the big banks, which are not publicly owned, and therefore the whole sectors of the economy which are productive and which could lead with the extra funds that he's talking about to be spent cannot be happen unless that private sector is prepared to invest in it and do so. Are we going to have a system where we print, I don't like the word, okay, we create more money by the central bank and the government to invest in the economy, but how do we invest it? We give it to the private sector to do so. We hand it over to them. Take, for example, housing. Are we saying we need to build, hundreds of thousands more homes, council houses in particular, for rent? Who is going to build them? Is it going to be the private sector, or shouldn't we have a national building corporation employing directly workers to do so, and the government bringing those funds in to finance that, to make sure that it happens? Are we going to, for example, take Jaguar? This week it's got 1.5 billion from the government to keep it going. Why is it being kept privately owned? Why don't we take that over, take equity into Jaguar, bring the company into the state sector? My aim, it seems to me, to really transform the situation is not to go back to the 1950s and 60s with the mixed economy, but to go forward much more radically to a much more socialized socialist economy based on the original principles of the labour movement as expressed in Clause 4, and start to implement that process. Now, if we're saying that we have to avoid bond vigilantes by creating money, then we can avoid the bond market, we still won't avoid the attacks of finance capital internationally on the currency and other parts if we just try to expand the money. We need, as Chris said, we need capital controls over the flight of money, but we also need to control the means of production in the economy as part of the plan. I heard nothing from Chris saying he's in favour of the public ownership of the major sectors of the economy and big business and the banks. Apparently all we have to do is create more money and hand it over to whom to create the results.
Michael, I don't think you were listening carefully to what I was saying.
All right, well, I'll try and listen again.
Yeah, well, because I said explicitly what we need to be doing, for example, is kicking the privateers out of the public services, kicking them out of the National Health Service.
Public services, Chris. What about big business? What about the
yes,
banks?
well, listen, no, absolutely, Michael, I'm not against it. And you were saying,
against it.
But I mean, you were implying that we need to rely on these people. I mean, there is a thing called nationalisation, and where necessary, we can take the commanding heights of the economy into public ownership, and that is
absolutely not necessary. You say where necessary. Is it necessary?
Well, I believe it is. Yeah, I believe it is.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but I think look. Well, maybe we're straining to agree with each other then. But what I'm talking about is we have the means at our disposal to make that transition from the system that we have at the moment, this kind of neoliberal nightmare, which has left 15 million people in poverty and public services in meltdown. I mean, we're in a terrible state as a country. And we have the means at our disposal because we issue our own currency. In fact, one of the only good things probably that Gordon Brown did was to keep us out of the Eurozone. So we have that power at our disposal. Let's use that to bring the commanding heights of the economy into public ownership, to kick the privateers, as I say, out of the public services. Let's expand the public services where we need to do that. Let's improve our crumbling infrastructure, build the houses that we need, and create that good society. As I keep saying, we're the biggest economy in the world. Why are 15 million people living in poverty? Why is our housing stock in such a dilapidated state? Why is our infrastructure crumbling all over the place?
Let me bring in.
It's because we lack political will.
When you began your discussion, you mentioned nothing about public ownership. You mentioned nothing about commanding heights of the economy. You only referred to the question of modern monetary theory, that we need to expand. Because we control a unit of account, we can have the funds to improve the economy. I'm replying to that point.
It's a tool.
Saying,
all it is a
not
tool.
Enough.
Well, it might not be, but it's a tool which you seem to reject. It's a tool. Understanding how the monetary system operates is a tool that I want to see us using to build that socialist society that I think we both want to see.
That's all you said in the first introduction. You spent nothing at all about commanding heights.
Okay, you two boys stop fighting. Let me bring in Yasmin again, because I think you made a really important point about the international aspect, which I think is hugely important. What would happen if we tried it in one country? What would happen if we tried in Britain? Capital internationally would go berserk. They wouldn't just sit by and let us try this out, would they? How important is the international aspect, and then how do you see in a future society, how could we actually organize and produce according to need rather than for profit? Because we have to wrap up in 3-4 minutes now.
Yeah, all this expectation, all these transitional programs that is being proposed by Chris ignores the fact that a lot of the capital, a lot of industries are multinationals. You are not in a position to take them over. You can't nationalize them that simply. If you do, you will face sanctions from US, from Germany. The imports of this country are far higher than its exports. The percentage, even on a simple issue such as feeding the country, there will be a major problem.
So what do we do then?
No one is against reform. No one is against demanding various transitions. No one is saying that. The problem is creating the illusion that such transitions can lead to a socialist society. They won't. They have a lot of practical problems as they confront international capital, as they confront international banking, as SWIFT will come into effect and you will be out of it. Like a lot of countries that have dissed the US can't do basic transactions.
Like Russia, which is one of the strongest economies.
Don't interrupt.
One of the strongest currencies.
Let Yasmin make her point, please. Come on.
And so you will first of all those, but more importantly, none of the once you start impoverishing the country, you will have rebellions. You will have people who would want to return back to the old system, as opposed to this smooth transition to a socialist system. So no one is saying, don't call for nationalization, don't call for public ownership, don't call for spending more. All I'm saying is that don't think this will bring socialism. These are correct demands as demands that any socialist should put forward in order to fight the irrationality, the disasters that capitalism is creating. But in the long run, you do need not an automatic transformation of capitalism because it faces such a big crisis that it will collapse, but a strategy to overthrow capitalism. And to overthrow capitalism, it's not going to be as easy as just following these transition demands and hoping that at some stage we will be in power. That's not going to happen. The working class needs to come to power. It needs to not just nationalize, but also take control of the state, take control of distribution, take control of exports and imports. It's only then that it can envisage a different kind of society. Otherwise, you're facing a chaotic system, even if you succeed, which you won't succeed, because in the very first steps, your economy will face penalties, dispossession, complete isolation, and you will find yourself in the terrible situations that many countries in global south, especially those that have dissed the United States, currently face themselves. Inflation rates of 45% are normal in some of these countries. Devaluation of the currency, which is the easiest way for global capital to impoverish a country, are unprecedented. Okay. You have a currency that drops between the morning and the lunchtime. Yeah. Not just in in axis of evil, but in many countries of the global south. Yeah. And you think that will improve the plight of the working class?
Thank you very much, Yasmin. Thank you very much, comrades. We can't solve the capitalism in 40 minutes, but thank you very much, Chris. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Yasmin, for having a really interesting discussion, which I'm sure will continue elsewhere. Bye, comrades.